Hey guys, Flanagan here, checking in with you this time about the foreign exchange market, which is a market, a graph that deals with money. So before I jump into that one, you might want to take a quick pause here. We do have two other graphs that deal with money, both of which have videos on this YouTube channel that you can go and check back on. So the money market is one, which was the Federal Reserve and monetary policy. The loanable funds was when the government needs to spend money during a recession, that crowding out due to deficit spending. So pause here, take a quick recap, and then go back and check out those videos if you need to. So our topic for today is the foreign exchange market, which we're going to be dealing with monies from all around the world and sometimes even made up money. So one thing we always want to remember when we are doing the foreign exchange graph is that we want to think like an investor. So anytime we look at foreign exchange, think like an investor. That means if interest rates are high, you as an investor want to earn those interest rates. So you're going to put your money in a country that has higher interest rates because you're not paying them. You would be earning that higher interest. So we'll get back to that later. So foreign exchange is basically we look at the value of one country's currency expressed in the value of another country's currency. So you can see the example down here, what a dollar is worth in terms of pesos, and then what a peso is worth in terms of dollars, which in this case, 1 peso is worth approximately 5 cents. So the foreign exchange market graph is going to show us the value of a currency compared to the value of a different country's currency. So you want to think about the foreign exchange market as an island in the middle of the ocean. And its only job is to exchange money. Because let's say, for example, in the US, we decide that we want to buy Japanese products. Japan is not going to accept US dollars. Their country is not based on the US dollar. So essentially, the idea is our money would go to this floating imaginary island in the middle of the ocean, and we would convert our US dollars into Japanese yen so that we could actually make that transaction. So this is just kind of written out visually so you can actually see what I'm saying, what to label the foreign exchange graph in any scenario. So I can't give you every possible scenario in every possible country. I'm going to give you the big picture, and you're going to have to apply that to different scenarios. So you can come back to this slide once we look at the graph, which is right here. So this is a generic frame that you can use for any foreign exchange market scenario. We can see it's got the X shape of supply and demand, price, and quantity. So it's a familiar setup. I'm going to say that we have country one, which is the country that we're being asked about, and country two, which is the other country or the foreign country. So if we're being asked about country one, we're going to title the graph basically the money that country number one uses. So the currency being examined, which is country number one's money. So you just say, what if that's the dollar? It would be the dollar market. So the price, the y-axis, you label it the second country's currency, price of the first country's currency. Basically, how much of country number two's money does it take to get country number one's money? Over here on the x-axis, this is just the quantity of the currency in the country that we're looking at. In our case, country number one. Now, the supply and demand curves can be a little bit tricky, but if you follow this frame and always come back to it, it'll start to stick. So the supply curve for currency number one from country number one, this is the supply of currency number one by people in country number one that want to do stuff in the other country. So the supply of currency number one by people living in country number one that want to do stuff in the other country. So they would supply more of their own currency if they want to do stuff in country number two, or supply less of their own currency if they want to do less stuff in country number two. The demand curve, this represents the demand for currency number one, the currency from the country being examined, by people from the other country who want to do stuff in country number one. So again, the demand for the currency that we're looking at by foreigners from the other country that want to do stuff in the country that we're looking at. So please come back to this slide. This is kind of the key that can unlock a lot of foreign exchange, just getting this graph right. So here's a scenario with real countries instead of country number 1 and country number 2. Let's say the US wants to import goods from Japan. We want to buy Japanese products as people in the United States. And I'm being asked to show the US dollar market. They will tell you which market to graph. So the US dollar market would be labeled like this. Dollar market, the yen price of the dollar, how many yen it takes to get a dollar, the quantity of the US dollar, again, because that's the country we're looking at. So the supply curve would represent the supply of dollars, US dollars, by people in the United States who want to do stuff in Japan. The demand curve would be labeled the demand for US dollars by people in Japan who want to do stuff in the United States. So this is a point where you can go check out that PDF that I have posted up on Classroom, and there's sort of like a fill in the blank note section, and this is kind of where it really takes off. So this is how we would label the US dollar market if we are interacting with Japan. Now our scenario is the US wants to import goods from Japan. However, we know that Japan only wants to accept yen in exchange for its products. So if we look back at our graph, we want to buy, as US, we want to buy Japanese goods. So we want to think, are people in the US going to supply dollars in order to do things in Japan? Or are people in Japan demanding US dollars to do stuff in the United States? Well, clearly our scenario said people in the US want to buy Japanese things. So what that means is the US is going to supply more US dollars into this foreign exchange market because they want to do stuff in Japan, in this case, purchasing products. So then down here you have why is it not the demand curve? So if the US is going to supply more US dollars, this is how we would shift it, just like everything else. An increase in the supply of US dollars shifts the supply curve to the right. Again, this representing the US people, Americans, are going to supply more US dollars because they want to purchase Japanese goods. So we would put more dollars, US dollars, into the dollar market. And now what we can see after we relabel our S2 and our original demand is that the price or the yen price of the dollar decreased. And what that means is that the dollar is less valuable now than it was before. The reason why is because there's more dollars. There was an increase in the supply of dollars. So what that means is there's more of it available, so it's less valuable. People aren't going to pay as high of a price for something that's super easily available all over the place. And so what we say there is that the value of the dollar or the US dollar depreciated compared to the yen, meaning it is weaker than the yen now. So it takes fewer yen to get a dollar than it did before that shift. So this is a slide where you can take a look at what's the difference between appreciating and depreciating. And we'll come back to that in just a minute. So you can pause right now and take a quick read. All right, so a recap of that graph is basically what I just talked about, just spelled out a little bit more. So again, you can take a pause to see the effect on the price of the US dollar here. So remix, air horns, rap remix, YouTube remix. Same scenario. The US still wants to import goods from Japan, but now we're going to look at it from the Japanese yen market perspective, not the dollar market. So this is how we would label the yen market. If we go all the way back a minute or two to the blank frame that we used, now that we're being asked about the yen, we title it the yen market. The dollar price of the yen is on the y-axis, the quantity of yen, because that's what we're being asked about, on the x. The supply curve represents the supply of yen by Japanese people who want to do stuff in the United States, while the demand curve represents the demand for yen by Americans who want to do stuff in Japan. So we want to think about which curve are we going to use here. The scenario again was US is buying Japanese products. So if the US supplied more dollars into the dollar market, which is what we saw in the last graph, what do they expect in return? Well, if we gave up dollars, we expect yen in return so we can buy those Japanese products. And again, here it explains why are we not looking at the demand, why are we not looking at the supply curve, I should say. So we would show an increase in the demand for yen because that matches our scenario. Americans are demanding more yen in order to purchase those Japanese products. Japanese people are not supplying yen to do stuff in the US. That has nothing to do with our scenario. In this case, the United States consumers are the actors. They're the ones who are doing things. So if we shift the demand for yen to the right, we see that the dollar price of the yen increased. That means the yen appreciated. The yen is more valuable now than it was before because the US supplied dollars to the dollar market and expected yen in return. So supply of dollars increased, which means the demand for yen increased because the US wanted to do business in Japan. So this again is just a written out recap of what I just said. It takes more dollars to get a yen than it did before, and we can see that going from price 1 to price 2. So this again is just a breakdown of why did I pick the specific curve instead of the other, the reasoning there. So you can take a pause and read that here. All right, so what are the shifters of the foreign exchange market? There are a few, and I want to specifically make sure we get these down because they are somewhat specific. The first one is interest rates. Remember, we're thinking like big baller investors. We want to earn the higher interest rate. So as investors, we want to go to where the higher interest rates are. So again, this would be a good time to make sure you have open that PDF of the filled in notes so you can keep track with us. So the first shifter is interest rates. We want to earn the higher interest rate. So here's an example. The scenario is 10% interest can be earned in the US or 5% interest can be earned in South Korea. So if we are asked about the dollar market, we want to think, is the US going to supply dollars to do stuff in Korea, or is Korea going to demand American dollars to do stuff in the United States? On the flip side, if you're asked about the won market, you need to think, is Korea going to supply the Korean won to do stuff in the US, or is the US going to demand won to do things in South Korea? Well, if the interest rate in the US is higher, that's better for us as the international ballers that we are. So South Korea is going to demand dollars to invest in these higher interest rates in the United States, which means on the flip side, if Korea is going to be demanding dollars to do things in the United States, they have to supply their own currency, the won, in order to receive those dollars. So those are the two bolded parts there. And it also shows you what happens to the value of the dollar and the value of the won. What you'll notice is that if one currency appreciates, it's more valuable, the other currency must be depreciating because we look at one currency in relation to another. If one is more valuable, the other one must be less valuable. The second shifter is income. If income increases, then consumers import more foreign goods because again, you're a baller, you're earning more money, you can afford those exotic, fancy European, Asian, African goods that you could not before. So here's an example with Mexico and Europe. If income in Mexico increases, they're going to demand more fancy, exotic European goods. So they're going to supply pesos to the peso market because they want to get European goods. So if they supply pesos, the peso depreciates because if there's more pesos in the market, they're not worth as much as they were before, which means before we even think about it, the euro must be appreciating. But the reason why is because if Mexicans are supplying pesos to the peso market, they are demanding euros so that they can buy those European goods. You supply your own currency in order to get the other country's currency. And this is just the same idea, but from the opposite perspective. If income is decreasing, then you can no longer afford those fancy, exotic European or foreign products. So you supply fewer of your own currency because you're not buying as much foreign goods, which means the demand for the other country's currency goes down. So in our example, if income decreases in Mexico, the supply of pesos in the peso market will decrease because Mexican consumers no longer want the expensive European goods. So if there's fewer pesos out there, they are more valuable. And if they do not want to supply pesos, that means the demand for the euro decreases in the euro market. So the peso appreciates, which means the euro must be depreciating. The third and last kind of major shifter is price level or inflation. If price level in a country goes up, foreign consumers do not want products from that country because they're too expensive. Pretty straightforward. If price level falls in a country, meaning goods in that country are cheaper, foreign consumers or customers want more goods. So for example, if the US hits a recession, gets into a recession, other countries are actually like, ooh, that could be good for us because American products are going to be cheaper. So the XN component for the US would increase because foreign consumers are going to come in to the US and buy cheap American products during our recession. On the flip side, though, if we're at a time of inflation, we're beyond full employment, foreign consumers go, American goods are too expensive. We don't want those anymore. So that would impact, are they supplying their own currency so that they can buy American goods, or are they not going to supply their own currency because they do not want to buy American goods? So here's a written out example for price level or inflation shifters using Russia and Mexico. So I'm just going to recommend that you pause right here because I reckon at this point, you're at about the point where you start hitting fast forward or skip ahead and you don't want to hear my voice. So pause it right here, read through that real quick, and then we'll move on. All right, moving on. This is also the same scenario on the flip side with Russia and Mexico being trading partners, except prices rise in Mexico. So what happens in the peso market? And here's the sort of what you want to be choosing between, and then the explanation down here. One more time, appreciating versus depreciating. You already saw this, so I'm not going to just straight up read it to you again. The difference between appreciating a currency being more valuable and depreciating, meaning it is less valuable. The last shifter is really just easy, tourism or tastes and preferences. If people want to travel to another country, they're going to supply their own currency into their own currency's market and demand more of the other country's currency in that other country's currency market. So again, with Japan and the US, if Americans want to travel to Japan, we're going to supply US dollars to the dollar market and demand yen from the yen market. So here is the chain reaction. And unfortunately, I think a bell is going to ring in about 20 seconds, so bear with me. If the US is in a recession, to help that recession, the Fed will lower interest rates. So that's domestically, but we're thinking foreign exchange internationally. So if the Fed lowers interest rates, those lower interest rates are undesirable for foreign investors. They do not want to invest in low interest rates. So if they do not want to invest in low interest rates, they're going to demand fewer US dollars because they don't want to invest. So if the demand for the dollar decreases, that means the value of the dollar decreases. So the US dollar depreciates. Now, what that means is if the dollar depreciates, foreign consumers see that that makes American products cheaper. So the foreign investors are like, man, we don't want the bad interest rates. But foreign consumers see that, wait, the dollar is weak right now. So that actually makes American products cheaper. So foreign consumers are going to come in and buy American products. So what that means is the US's net exports are going to increase because foreign consumers are buying cheap American products. So if net exports increase, that means AD shifts to the right, which on your graph, you can see that that increases price level in GDP and also drops unemployment. This slide right here is just the exact opposite, the chain reaction. If the US is in a time of inflation, how does that impact interest rates? What does that do to foreign investors? To the value of the dollar, it appreciates. And so what does that do in terms of affecting foreign consumers? And then here's our chain reaction. Whoop, down there, once that annoying little slide thing goes away. So that's all I have for you on the foreign exchange market. If you have any questions, as always, email me or get in touch. We will spend pretty much the entire next class period practicing foreign exchange. So watch this, do the current and capital account homework, come in with questions ready to ask. Otherwise, we're just going to get started practicing some FRQs. So until next time, have a good one.